requires to be altered. It is neither fit for war nor peace. Do you agree or disagree with Hamilton? What were the strengths and weaknesses of the Articles of Confederation? What problems, if any, did the founders face in writing the Articles of Confederation? What impact, if any, did Shays' Rebellion have on the founders' thinking about government? What is the significance of the Northwest Ordinance of 1787? If you're ready, please begin.
Government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. In saying this, Lincoln explains that the people and their rights must be at the forefront of our country at all times. That being said, the government must have enough power to secure the rights of citizens. We entirely agree with Alexander Hamilton that the Articles of Confederation were inadequate in several distinct ways. As a result of this, the rights of citizens were being compromised.
The original Articles of Confederation did not fund Congress, nor did it give it the power to raise money. They could not require states to pay taxes. Instead, they had to ask states for money. Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution says, in short, Congress has the power to lay and collect all taxes, duties, and imposts, as long as they were used for the common defense and country debt. But all taxes, duties, and imposts must remain the same throughout the entire country.
Also, Congress had no power over the state governments or their citizens. This was a major problem, as state governments and their citizens often ignored laws passed by Congress, deeming them unimportant and unnecessary. Congress could not regulate trade within the states, so other countries became hesitant to trade with the United States. Finally, citizens felt that their property rights were being threatened.
While there were many evident weaknesses in the Articles of Confederation, it was nevertheless a crucial milestone for a blossoming country. It successfully waged the war for independence against Great Britain and promoted the government to negotiate the Treaty of Paris, which ended the American Revolution. One of the most meaningful accomplishments was ensuring that each state recognized the laws of the other states. A great example of this, which occurred years later, is the Ford versus Ford case. A divorced couple decided the custody of their children in Virginia. The mother then successfully sued for full custody in South Carolina. The father appealed to the Supreme Court, and they overturned the decision. The issue was settled in Virginia and must be respected by South Carolina. The Articles of Confederation promoted the states to practice mutual respect.
These numerous concerns shed light on the weak federal government that the Articles of Confederation established. It made clear that the government requires some power to execute their responsibilities appropriately. President Gerald Ford once said, "A government big enough to give you everything you want is a government big enough to take from you everything you have." This incredibly wise statement warns citizens not to give the government too much power. There's a delicate balance of power between complete corruption and total freedom that must be recognized by the government. As a founding document, the Articles of Confederation didn't acknowledge the ratio between branches. Congress's power was extremely limited.
Congress's limited power, among other dilemmas, incited Shays' Rebellion, which took place in 1786. It finally convinced many Americans that it was time for a change. Local farmers, under the leadership of Daniel Shays, closed down courts where their cases were heard. It frightened many property owners, and the governor called the militia to put it down. This was a crucial turning point for our government, as it demonstrated to the founders that many changes needed to be made. It prompted them to ratify the Constitution, which successfully defended the right of citizens. Similar things are happening today, such as the raid on the Capitol on January 6th. Citizens fought against voter fraud in the 2020 election, which forcefully exercised their First Amendment right in a violent, extreme way.
Under the Articles of Confederation, the country continued to expand rapidly. The Northwest Ordinance of 1787 established a government for the Northwestern Territory, made a process for new states to come into the Union, and guaranteed that the new states could stay equal to the original 13 colonies. Each district was to be governed and administered by Congress until there were 5,000 adult-free males, which could then become its own territory and form its own legislature. This was significant because it set a precedent for all of the new states to come. There would be newly established states instead of the expansion of pre-existing states.
The Northwest Ordinance also brought in many new factors into land distribution, including land ownership, abolition and transfer of state claims, admission of new states, education, and many other factors. One of its most notable factors is the abolishment of slavery in new states, where only indentured servants were allowed. In addition, new states had to fulfill the requirement of 60,000 people. This system established the first guarantee of freedom of contract in the United States and established the concept of fee simple ownership, which meant the owner of land had unlimited power to sell and give it away. Based on the many issues we have raised, it is evident that the Articles of Confederation were extremely flawed. However, served a critical role in the development of our nation. We are now ready for questions.
Great, thank you so much. Let's talk about Shays' Rebellion just for a little bit. What was that about? I mean, what happened? You told me in general terms that, you know, what the outcome was and that Shays were mad. But what made Daniel Shays so upset that he'd be willing to undertake this kind of rebellion against the country he had fought for? What was going on there?
Well, he was a farmer and he provided a lot of things for the government and the country in general. And the government, since they didn't have enough power to tax, they had to ask the states for government or for money. And so taking the money from the farmers in the states caused them to get mad, and they didn't want to take their profit anymore. So they revolted and started Shays Rebellion.
So why was it so? Well, let's put that into a context then. Shays Rebellion, we know that pushed us into the Constitutional Convention. Can you compare Shays Rebellion with the Whiskey Rebellion of just about 10 years later? Can you remember the details of that one and make a comparison there?
Could you restate the question, please?
Sure. Could you compare Shays Rebellion with the Whiskey Rebellion? So if you can't remember the Whiskey Rebellion, it was about 1795, I think. So the Constitution has gone into effect. Washington's president. Do you remember any details about that at all?
I think the two are similar in that it prompted the founders and the government at the time to create new laws on different subjects, such as Shays Rebellion prompted the government to create a new constitution, which is our constitution that we now have in effect, and Whiskey Rebellion created new laws on alcohol.
Okay, thank you so much. I'll pass the baton to Rita.
Do you think the Northwest Ordinance is considered the most significant measure passed by the Confederation?
I actually do think it was a pretty large measure passed by the Confederation, just based on it provided the basic guidelines to create new states. And without those, we wouldn't really have a clear precedent for what our states were to become, such as 5,000 people to create a legislator, 60,000 to create a state, many laws on segregation and such. It really set an example for the states to come. And I think that was very important in the foundation of what the Confederation set.
I agree with my colleague. I think another important point that the Northwest Ordinance established is the abolishment of slavery in new states, which made our government and our country the way it is today.
And as well, the Constitution points out statehood in Article 4, Section 3, Clause 1, which states that new states can come into the Confederation as long as no states are being coming into the Confederation together or being taken down by the government without the government's consent to it.
You think of any other states that the North or potential states that the Northwest Ordinance might affect now or might have affected in the past?
The Northwest Ordinance today, it relates to the statehood of Washington, D.C. In the Constitution, it says that Washington, D.C., our country's capital, must be within another state. And some people in government right now are trying to make it a state, but is not constitutional because of that.
Do you think we should change the Constitution then? Or should Washington, D.C. remain the only national, the only nation's capital that doesn't have a political representation? What do you think?
I agree that it should not have political.
Sorry, go ahead.
I agree that it should not have political representation, as it says in the Constitution. I don't think we should change the Constitution because our country's founders had a specific plan in mind for how it would function, and I think that was a pretty good plan.
And also, Washington, D.C. has some political representation, as the Amendment 23 in the Constitution gave Washington, D.C. the right to have electoral votes in the presidential elections.
And the Articles of Confederation really showed the founders what the issues were within the Articles of Confederation, what needed to be fixed. So changing the Constitution could potentially cause us to experience what had already happened in the past.
Do we not change the Constitution for other reasons? Have we ever changed the Constitution?
We have changed the Constitution such as in amendments, but we already do have sort of political representation in Washington, D.C. So I don't think it's a major issue to become a state, as it does have sort of an influence already. And these amendments were major issues such as our First Amendment, as well as women's suffrage and slave rights.
And also, I'm not quite sure on which amendments it was, but the abolition of alcohol was in the Constitution, and then later, in the later years, we changed alcohol back to being legal in the states.
So it's probably one of the less successful amendments. Just a really big question then: which should a free people be more afraid of? A government like that under the Articles that has too little power, or a government that has too much power, of which they were, of course, also afraid? Which is the greater danger, do you think?
I think the greater danger is the government having too much power, because us as Americans, we had come from Great Britain and they had a monarchy and we had no freedom. And for example, the Boston Tea Party, that was against the law at the time to revolt against what you don't believe in and try and claim your First Amendment rights and freedom of speech. And so if we don't have enough power in the government, we can always fix it like we did with the Articles of Confederation.
I agree with my colleague. Having too little power would be a bad thing, as it would cause many problems in our government, but having too much power over the people could really become a different form of government than a republic. If you have too much power over the people, it can lead to monarchies or complete control over the people, which leaves us without our rights. And that's the complete thing that the Constitution is set to abolish. That's why we have our natural rights.
Also, going off of what they've said, I believe that the bigger threat is a government that has more power. Once a government has more power, they can start infringing on other people's rights. A quote by Lysander Spooner was, a man's natural rights are his own against the world, whether that, or any infringement on these rights is equally a crime, whether that be by one man who calls himself a robber or by a million men who call themselves government. Once government becomes too powerful, they can start infringing on our Bill of Rights, such as the First Amendment, which is our freedom of speech, or our Second Amendment, which is the right to bear arms.
I agree with what all of my colleagues said. Another quote by Edmund Burke says, "The greater the power, the more dangerous the abuse." This relates to having the government having too much power, because once the government starts to take more and more power away from the people, they start infringing on the people's rights and causing more damage.
Sounds like you guys have given that some thought. Good job there. Thank you so much. So a little bit of just a little bit of feedback. Wonderful, wonderful presentation. I was looking for, hoping for a bit more detail about Shays Rebellion, some of the details there. It's hard to know how much you want to know and want to be able to give, but you certainly understood the important. You understood what made it important. You understood the outcome and the comparison with Shays Rebellion and the Whiskey Rebellion. Well, one, the Whiskey Rebellion was because it was under the Constitution. The federal government was able to bring an army in and end it. So, so that was. I think I got that. I think I'm reading my notes right. I'm not sure that I could agree with you about the statehood in Washington, D.C., but you made an extremely solid argument, and that's what I was looking for. So thank you so much for that.
I thought it was fine. I thought you had a really fine presentation. I think some of those hot dog vendors in downtown Washington would argue with you that they deserve to have representation in Congress. I think that the fact that there's 2 or 3 different police departments and you don't know who to call, I think they'd like to have a little better differentiation. I think they probably feel like they're out on an island sometimes. I really, really liked your presentation. I think if you look a little closer at Shays Rebellion, you'll find out that most of those farmers were also soldiers, and they had not been paid a long time, but then they were expected to pay their taxes. They were having their land taken from them. I think those kinds of things are the detail that we were looking for when we asked you a question, but gosh, you had everything else and you were able to tell us everything else. And I really, really appreciate your teachers and you for preparing yourself so well and being able to give us so much detail about so many different areas of these questions for Unit 2, and look forward to seeing you again tomorrow.